Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Story 1. The moment I checked into the Airbnb, something about the room felt slightly off. It was clean, modern, and everything appeared to be in order, but there was this nagging feeling I could not shake. Maybe it was the way the mirror seemed just a little too pristine, or the awkward angle it had compared to the rest of the room. I chalked it up to travel fatigue and forced myself to relax. The host had been polite during check-in, giving a quick tour and handing over the keys without much small talk. They said the mirror was antique, part of the charm, and that I would love the lighting for photos. I nodded and pretended to care, even though I never take photos while traveling alone. Something about their eyes felt too watchful, like they were memorizing how I looked in the space. Still, I smiled and thanked them. That night, I struggled to fall asleep. The bed was comfortable enough, and the air conditioning worked fine, but I kept tossing and turning. I thought I heard faint clicking noises like a small mechanical shift, but convinced myself it was the old pipes or maybe just the fridge. At some point I fell into a light sleep, only to wake up with the sensation of being watched. I stared into the mirror in the dim light, and a strange unease crawled up my spine. In the morning I examined the mirror again. It looked normal at first glance, just a tall, decorative piece mounted to the wall facing the bed. I leaned in close, tapping the glass gently, and noticed the sound felt off, duller than regular glass. I placed my hand against it and could feel a faint warmth radiating from behind it. That was when I knew something was not right. I tried to shake the feeling and went about my day, exploring the nearby cafes and taking a long walk along the waterfront. The scenery helped a little, and for a while I forgot about the mirror. I returned just before 7 p.m., bringing food back with me. As I unpacked my dinner on the small table, my eyes kept drifting back toward that damn mirror. I finally decided to check behind it. It took some effort, but I carefully removed the frame from the wall. What I found chilled me to the bone. Behind the mirror was a small, black device no bigger than a deck of cards wired into the wall and aimed directly at the bed. A tiny green light blinked on the device, confirming it was active. I dropped the frame in shock and stepped back, heart racing. I scrambled to grab my phone and took pictures of the device from different angles. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to sit down to breathe. I kept asking myself if this could somehow be a mistake, but deep down I already knew the answer. Someone had installed a hidden camera to watch me while I slept. That kind of violation twisted my stomach into knots. I packed my things in a frenzy, tossing clothes into my bag without folding. I had no plan beyond getting out of there as fast as I could. My flight was still 3 days away, but I could not stay in that room another night. I left the key on the table and walked out, trying to appear calm in case the host was watching. Once I was far enough away, I called the booking platform. The representative on the phone sounded alarmed when I explained what I found. They asked for the photos and the exact location of the device. I sent them everything and waited as they put me on hold. After several minutes, they confirmed they would be launching an investigation and offered to help me find another place. I agreed and asked them to notify the authorities. After securing a new place in a busy hotel downtown, I sat in the room and let the weight of it all hit me. I had almost slept in a room being filmed without my knowledge. I thought of all the times I had changed clothes, all the moments of privacy I thought I had. The idea that someone might have been watching made me feel sick and violated. I took a long, hot shower, hoping to scrub away the feeling. Later that night, I received a call from a local police officer. They had received a complaint from the platform and wanted to speak with me in person. I agreed and met them in the hotel lobby the next morning. I showed them the photos and gave a full account of what happened. They took it seriously and assured me the matter would be handled. The officer mentioned that it was not the first report of such a thing in the area. That admission made me feel both relieved and disturbed. I was not alone, but that meant others had suffered the same. The officer thanked me for coming forward and promised to keep me updated. I watched them leave with a small glimmer of reassurance. For the rest of my trip, I stayed alert, checking every mirror and smoke detector in each room I entered. I knew it would be a long time before I could fully relax in a new place again. The sense of safety I used to have while traveling had been stolen. But I also knew that I had done the right thing by speaking up. Maybe it would stop someone else from going through the same experience. A few weeks after returning home, I received an email from the police. They had executed a warrant and found multiple hidden cameras in several of the host's properties. Evidence was being collected, and charges were being filed. I felt a mix of relief and anger knowing how long it had probably gone on. But justice, even delayed, felt like a step forward. The platform also followed up with a message thanking me for reporting the issue. They confirmed that the host had been banned and that the listing was removed permanently. They even offered to reimburse the entire trip, including my emergency hotel stay. I accepted the refund but told them what mattered most was that they tightened their policies. No one should have to find a hidden camera the hard way. I still travel, but with caution. I bring a small flashlight and scan every room, check every mirror, and trust my instincts more than ever. What happened changed me, made me more aware of the silent dangers that can hide in plain sight. But I also found strength in the way I responded, refusing to let it go unnoticed. I had been watched, yes, but I had also seen through the deception and taken action. Sometimes, when I pass by a mirror in a hotel room, I still pause. I remember that moment, the cold glass hiding a cruel secret. But instead of fear, I now feel a steady resolve. I was not broken by it. I was made sharper. Story 2. The first time I noticed something was off, it was subtle. A cup on the kitchen counter was a few inches from where I had left it. I blamed my own forgetfulness, told myself I must have nudged it without realizing. I live alone, so I tend to second-guess myself a lot. But that tiny detail stuck in the back of my mind like a splinter. I started locking everything more carefully after that. Front door, back door, windows, even the sliding glass panel that leads to the balcony. I double-checked each lock before bed, sometimes even getting out of bed to check again. It was not like I had experienced a break-in or anything. Still, something did not feel right, and that feeling grew heavier each night. Then came the photos. I found them on my kitchen table one morning. A neat stack of glossy prints with no note or envelope. My hands trembled as I picked them up. The first one was of me lying in bed, covers drawn up, mouth slightly open in sleep. The next few were worse. They showed me in various stages of sleep, from different angles, some from my bedroom door, others from what looked like just a few feet away. One was taken from above, like the photographer was standing over me. My chest tightened as I flipped through them, each photo making my skin crawl more than the last. Someone had been inside my home while I slept. I felt exposed in a way I had never felt before. I checked all the locks again, but they were secure. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken windows, no picked locks. The idea that someone had bypassed all that and stood in my bedroom sent a chill down my spine. I could not think clearly, could not breathe normally. I called the police, of course. They came and looked around, asked questions, took the photos as evidence. They were polite but not overly concerned, at least not visibly. There were no fingerprints on the photos, no obvious signs of entry. They told me to stay alert and call again if anything else happened. I bought new locks that afternoon, the kind you can only open with a code. I had a security system installed and even put up cameras in the main areas of the house. That gave me a bit of comfort, at least enough to sleep with the lights on. But in the quiet dark of night, I still felt watched. The feeling lingered no matter how secure I tried to make things. A week passed without any new incidents. I checked the footage daily and nothing seemed out of place. The motion sensors triggered only when I moved, no unexplained alerts or intrusions. I started to believe that maybe whoever it was had gotten what they wanted and moved on. Maybe the extra precautions had scared them off. That illusion shattered quickly. One morning I woke up to another stack of photos, placed neatly at my bedside. My blood went cold as I stared at them. These were not older pictures, they were new. They showed me sleeping again, taken just hours before. I vomited into the trash can next to my bed. My limbs were shaking, my mind spinning. They had been here again, standing right beside me while I was unconscious. I checked the cameras and the footage was completely clean. No alerts, no movement, no sign of anyone but me. I called the security company in a panic. They said everything was working fine, no technical issues, no evidence of tampering. But that could not be true. Someone had been inside and left no trace. That left only one explanation. Whoever this was knew how to avoid detection. I started sleeping on the couch in the living room. I placed sharp objects near me at night just in case. I kept the lights on, the television playing softly in the background to drown out every creak. My house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a trap I could not escape. I avoided inviting anyone over, not that I had many people in my life. My coworkers were polite but distant. I was never close to my neighbors. The only person I saw regularly was the delivery guy, and he always kept things brief. I started watching him closely too, looking for signs. I even began suspecting people I passed on the street. A man walking his dog, a woman jogging by, even the mail carrier, they all looked suspicious in my eyes. Anyone could be the one watching me, or anyone could be slipping into my house when I let my guard down. I bought a motion-activated recorder and placed it by my bed. I left it running every night, hoping it would catch something. For several nights it picked up nothing but my tossing and turning. Then, one morning I played it back and heard footsteps. Soft, deliberate, right next to me. I nearly dropped the recorder. The footsteps stopped and there was the faintest sound of breathing, far too close to the microphone. Then a whisper too soft to make out the words, but definitely a voice. I took the recording to the police, but they still had no leads. I saw the frustration in their eyes, masked behind politeness. I stopped sleeping. At best, I dozed off for an hour or two before waking in a panic. My hair began to fall out. I lost weight without trying. My coworkers noticed, but I brushed off their concern. How could I explain something I barely understood myself? Then something changed. One night, while pretending to sleep, I heard the door creak open. My heart slammed against my ribs. I kept my breathing steady, eyes barely open, just enough to see a shape in the doorway. Someone was there, watching me. They moved closer, slow and steady. I had placed a hammer under the blanket beside me. When the figure leaned over, I grabbed it and swung with every ounce of fear and fury I had. The metal connected with a sickening crack. They dropped instantly. I turned on the light and saw him. A man, dressed in black, camera slung around his neck. His face was unfamiliar, but his presence explained everything. I tied his hands and feet with cords from the blinds and called 911. The police came quickly this time. They found a key in his pocket, a copy of mine. He had somehow gotten access to it and duplicated it. In his car, parked a few blocks away, were hundreds of photos. Not just of me sleeping, but of me in the shower, cooking, reading. He had been watching me for months. They arrested him on the spot. I later found out he had no criminal record, nothing to indicate what he was capable of. Just another face in the crowd, easily ignored. He said nothing during the investigation, just stared blankly at the wall. After that, I changed everything. New locks, new address, new routines. I kept my name off public records and quit my job. I live quieter now, more carefully, always watching. But the fear never left completely. I sleep better, but not without precautions. Cameras, alarms, and a weapon within reach. The memory of those photos never really fades. They remind me how fragile privacy is, how easily it can be taken. But I fought back, and I survived. That is what matters most. Story 3. I thought blocking him would be the end of it. After everything that happened, I finally gathered the courage to cut him off. I deleted his number, unfollowed him on everything, and blocked him on every app I could think of. The silence felt like a relief at first, a breath of fresh air after months of choking tension. I believed it was over and done, that I had finally reclaimed my peace. The first package arrived 2 weeks later. It was a small box, plain, unmarked, with no return address. At first, I thought it was a mistake, maybe something I had ordered and forgotten about. But when I opened it, I found a crumpled receipt from a fast food order I had thrown out the day before. My heart sank as I stared at it, confused and uneasy. I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe someone dug through my trash and thought it would be funny to send it back to me. But it did not make sense. Who would go through that trouble just for a prank? I threw the box away and tried not to think about it. But a few days later, another package arrived. This one was larger and heavier. Inside, I found empty containers from the same week, used tissues, and even a broken hairbrush I had tossed out. My own handwriting stared back at me from the grocery list I had scribbled and discarded. Panic started creeping in around the edges of my mind. I double-checked the locks on my doors and windows that night. The thought that someone might be watching me made my skin crawl. I lived alone and had not told anyone about what was happening. There was no one to reassure me, no one to tell me I was just being paranoid. I kept the lights on and barely slept. By the end of the week, I had received 3 more packages. They arrived like clockwork, one every other day. Each box held more of my trash, more things I knew had come from my apartment. Someone was collecting my garbage and sending it back to me. It was not just creepy, it was personal. I went to the local police station to file a report. The officer listened but offered little help. Since there was no direct threat and no proof of who was sending the packages, there was not much they could do. They advised me to install a security camera and keep all the packages as evidence. I left feeling more helpless than before. I bought a cheap camera and set it up near my front door. Every night, I would check the footage, hoping to catch a glimpse of the person leaving the boxes. But the packages kept coming, always delivered in the middle of the night when the camera lost clarity. The figure on screen was nothing but a blur, hunched and hooded, impossible to identify. The stress began eating away at me. I started double bagging my trash and taking it to a dumpster 3 blocks away. But the packages kept coming, now with older garbage I had long forgotten. Someone had been collecting my trash for weeks, maybe months. I felt watched, invaded, powerless. I suspected it was him, of course. Who else would go to such lengths? But I had no proof, and confronting him felt like opening a door I had already slammed shut. Part of me hoped he would just get bored and stop. The other part was terrified of what else he might escalate to. One morning I found a package waiting on my doorstep that was different from the others. It was wrapped more carefully, and inside was not just garbage but a photograph. It showed me sitting at my desk, taken through the window from a distance. My blood went cold as I stared at my own image, unaware, vulnerable. I called the police again and showed them the photo. This time they took it more seriously. They said it could count as stalking and might warrant a deeper investigation. Still, I could hear the hesitation in their voices. Without a clear face or name, there was not much they could promise. I told a coworker about what was happening, needing someone to know. She urged me to stay with a friend or even consider moving. The idea of uprooting my life because of someone else's obsession made me angry. I had already given up so much, and I did not want to lose more. But fear was starting to outweigh pride. I spent the next few nights at her place, sleeping on her couch, jumping at every noise. The packages stopped while I was gone. It confirmed what I had feared most, that whoever it was, they knew where I lived and when I was home. I felt like a prisoner in my own life. When I returned to my apartment, I made a decision. I was not going to be scared anymore. I took my laptop and went through every online account, every old photo, every trace of my past with him. I deleted everything that could tie me back to him. I changed my number, set up 2-factor authentication, and even contacted the landlord about changing my locks. A few days later, I received a message through an old email I rarely used. It was from an anonymous address, but the tone was unmistakably his. The message was short, just a sentence telling me I could never throw him away like trash. Look, I reported it, blocked the account, and took a screenshot for the police. That was the last message I ever got. The packages stopped arriving after that. I do not know what changed. Maybe he realized I was not afraid anymore. Maybe the police presence made him back off. Or maybe, finally, he just gave up. I kept the camera up for a while longer, just in case. The footage remained quiet, uneventful. I began to sleep better, breathe easier, and slowly piece my life back together. The fear still lingered, but it no longer ruled me. Months passed and nothing happened. I took a short trip out of town, reconnected with old friends, and even started dating again. It was not easy, but it felt like I was moving forward. I kept the photograph, the one he took of me, as a reminder of what I had survived. Well, healing did not happen all at once, but it happened. I found comfort in the ordinary again, the sound of the kettle boiling, the feel of clean sheets, the sight of my reflection not looking over her shoulder. I was still cautious, still vigilant, but I was no longer living in fear. I had taken back my life. Whatever his goal had been, he failed. I was not broken, not ruined, not defeated. I had endured, adapted, and outlasted the storm he tried to send my way. In the end, I had thrown him out for good. And this time he stayed gone. Story 4. I first noticed something strange a few weeks after moving into my apartment. I would come home and small things would be off, like my cereal box moved an inch to the left or the lights in the bathroom being on when I knew I had turned them off. At first I chalked it up to forgetfulness. I had just started a demanding job and my sleep schedule was a mess. I figured my brain was just playing tricks on me. Then one night, I found the toilet seat up. That might not sound like a big deal, but I live alone and I always put the seat down. That was the first time I considered that maybe someone else was in my apartment. I checked the locks, the windows, everything. Nothing was broken. Nothing was forced open. I decided to install a small security camera in the living room, more out of paranoia than anything else. I bought one of those simple ones that send footage to your phone. I figured I would either catch something strange or prove to myself that I was being ridiculous. Either way, it would help me sleep better. I never imagined what I would actually find. The next morning, I checked the footage while sipping my coffee. The screen loaded, showing an empty room, then the hours sped by in silence. At around 2 a.m., the motion sensor triggered. A man stepped out of my hallway closet, casually stretched, and walked into the kitchen. He moved like he had done this 1,000 times before. He opened the fridge, poured himself a glass of milk, then sat on the couch and turned on the TV. I was frozen, coffee cup in midair, watching this stranger lounge in my apartment like he owned the place. He eventually walked back to the closet and closed the door behind him. I felt sick. I called the police, but there was not much they could do without catching him in the act. They told me to call back if I saw him again. That did not help me sleep. That night I locked my bedroom door and sat in bed with a bat, watching the feed on my phone. At 1:58 a.m., he came out again. I quietly called 911 while watching him move through the apartment. He started making himself a sandwich, completely unaware that I was watching him. When the police arrived, they came in through the front door and caught him mid-bite. He did not even resist. He just put the sandwich down and raised his hands. They asked him a few questions right there in the living room while I stood behind them in shock. He told them he had lived here for months, that he had made a copy of my keys the first week I moved in, after we met in the hallway, that he had simply never left. He claimed he had nowhere else to go, and that he only stayed in the closet during the day to avoid being seen. I could not understand how I had not noticed him sooner. How did someone live in my apartment without me knowing? The police took him away, and I was left with more questions than answers. After he was gone, I changed the locks and had the closet door sealed shut. I could not bring myself to open it again. For weeks, I kept expecting him to come back. Every creak of the floor or whisper of wind outside sent my heart racing. I barely slept, barely ate. I called my landlord to explain what had happened and asked if they had any records of anyone else living here. They confirmed that only I was listed on the lease. No other tenants, no maintenance scheduled, nothing. Somehow he had just inserted himself into my life like a shadow. I hired a locksmith to install a more secure deadbolt and got a better security system. I added cameras to every room. I even asked a friend to stay with me for a few days just so I would not be alone. It helped, a little, but not enough. One night, a week after the incident, I heard a knock on the door. I froze, holding my breath. The knock came again, slow and steady. I looked through the peephole and saw nothing. When I opened the door, there was only a small note on the floor. It read, "I never left." That was it. No signature, no explanation. Just 4 words that made my blood run cold. I slammed the door and called the police again. They searched the apartment thoroughly and found no one. No signs of forced entry, nothing out of place. But the note was real. They told me it could be a prank, maybe someone saw the arrest and wanted to scare me. I wanted to believe that, but I knew better. I started sleeping with the lights on. I barely left the apartment. I even took some time off work. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. But deep down, I knew I was not imagining things. Then one day, while rearranging my closet, I found a small hole in the drywall. It was expertly cut, like someone had carved out a hiding spot. Inside was a blanket, some empty water bottles, and a notebook. I pulled it out with shaking hands. The notebook was filled with pages and pages of writing, observations about me, my routines, my habits. What time I left for work, what time I showered, or what I liked to eat. He had been watching me the whole time, documenting everything like I was some kind of experiment. I turned the last page and found a list of things he wanted to try next. More interaction, it read. Maybe speak. Maybe reveal. I dropped the notebook and ran to the bathroom to throw up. He had planned to become more than just a shadow. He wanted to become part of my life. I gave the notebook to the police, who reopened the investigation. They said it might help in charging him with something more serious. I moved out a week later. I left the city entirely and got a new job somewhere no one knew me. I never told anyone the full story. How could I? Who would believe me? I still have trouble believing it myself. But I check every closet now, every time I move into a new place. I never feel completely alone, and maybe I never will. Sometimes I think about how close he had gotten, how easily he slipped into my world without me noticing. I wonder how many other people live like this, hiding in the margins of someone else's life. I wonder if someone is watching me now, waiting to make their move. But I am not the same person I was before. Now I lock every door twice. I check every corner, every dark space. I trust my instincts. I do not ignore the small signs. And if I ever hear a sound I cannot explain, I do not assume I imagined it. I make sure I know who is in my home. I make sure no one can just copy a key and never leave. And most of all, I never let myself forget what happened. Because forgetting would mean it could happen again. And I will never let that happen. Story 5. I started therapy about 8 months ago. The stress of my job and the growing unease I felt in my own home were becoming too much to carry alone. I was desperate for help and thought maybe talking it out with someone trained to listen could help me understand myself better. So I scheduled my first appointment and walked into that cozy office with the hope of healing. The therapist greeted me with a warm smile and a soft voice that instantly put me at ease. The room had calming tones, soft lighting, and a couch that was worn but welcoming. I remember sitting down, taking a deep breath, and spilling my emotions like I had been waiting for this moment for years. Each session after that became easier as I opened up more and more. I talked about my fears, my childhood, and the people I trusted the most. I cried over memories I had buried, laughed at things I once thought were painful, and said things I had never spoken out loud before. Therapy felt like the only space where I was not being judged. I felt safe and heard, and I believed the person sitting across from me was a professional I could trust. Over time, I noticed something odd but brushed it off. Occasionally, the therapist would glance at a device on the side table, not a notebook or a laptop, but something that looked like a recorder. I assumed it was part of their method, maybe something used for reference, and I never questioned it. I figured therapists sometimes recorded sessions for their own review, especially with patient consent. I never gave consent, though. I was never asked. Still, I did not think much of it at first, because the trust I had built with them felt real. But then one day, a friend of mine sent me a podcast link with a message that said, "This sounds exactly like something you told me in therapy." I clicked the link out of curiosity. The title of the podcast was vague and professional sounding, something that could easily be mistaken for a generic mental health show. But as I listened, my blood ran cold. The episode told a story almost identical to what I had shared during my 4th session. At first, I told myself it had to be a coincidence. Surely there were others with similar experiences. But then the speaker on the podcast said a very specific detail about my story, one I had never told anyone except during that session. My stomach dropped. There was no denying it. That was my story. The voice on the podcast had been altered, but I knew it was my story. My words, my pain, told to the world by someone who swore to help me heal. I felt betrayed in a way I never knew possible. My trust was not just broken, it was shattered beyond repair. I did not want to believe it was my therapist. I tried convincing myself that maybe someone had overheard me talking, or that it was an insane coincidence. But the more episodes I listened to, the clearer it became. Story after story lined up perfectly with things I had said in sessions over the months. There were details only a therapist would know. Stories about fears I had never shared outside of that room. They were told with slight modifications, enough to hide identities, but not enough to hide the core truth. I could even hear the hesitation in the speaker's voice when discussing parts that were deeply personal. I stopped attending sessions immediately. I never confronted the therapist face to face. I could not bear the idea of sitting in that room again, pretending I did not know. I canceled all upcoming appointments and ignored follow-up messages. For a few weeks, I shut down emotionally. I stopped talking to friends, ignored calls, and avoided places that reminded me of that office. The betrayal made me question every conversation I had ever had with anyone. I started to wonder if people around me were listening just to use my words later. Eventually, I mustered the courage to investigate. I searched for every episode of the podcast and wrote down each detail that matched my stories. I also found a few anonymous reviews and comments under some episodes where listeners noticed the stories felt real, too real. Some even wondered aloud whether the podcast was using real people. I contacted a lawyer and shared my story. At first, I was afraid no one would believe me. But when the lawyer listened to the episodes and read my therapy notes, they saw the same pattern. My case was not just emotional, it was legal. We reported everything to the proper licensing board. A formal complaint was filed, and an investigation began. I had to relive every detail again through statements and interviews, but this time I was not doing it for healing. I was doing it for justice. The hardest part was knowing that other patients might also have been used. I felt responsible somehow, even though I knew I had done nothing wrong. The thought of someone else crying in that same room, thinking they were safe, while being recorded for content, haunted me. I could not let it continue. Months passed before I received an update. The therapist was found to be in violation of multiple ethical and legal standards. They lost their license, and the podcast was taken down from all major platforms. I was offered a settlement and the opportunity to pursue further legal action if I wanted. But more than money or revenge, I wanted closure. I wanted to feel safe again. I wanted to trust that there were still people out there who genuinely wanted to help others without turning their pain into a product. So I took the win for what it was and moved forward. I started therapy again, this time with someone new, someone highly recommended and transparent about their methods. It took me a long time to open up again, but I did slowly. I asked questions, set boundaries, and made sure everything was on my terms. This time, the healing came with caution. Now I speak to others about my experience not to shame, but to warn. But trust is fragile and sacred, especially when someone is in pain. If something feels wrong, it is okay to question it. Therapy should never leave you feeling more broken than when you began. I found my strength again, not through silence, but through action. What happened to me will not define me, but it has shaped me. I know now that healing does not come from someone else fixing you. It comes from taking back control, even after someone tried to steal it from you. Story 6. It started with little things. A spoon in the wrong drawer. A window I was sure I had closed standing wide open the next morning. My keys moved from the hook to the coffee table, even though I never placed them there. At first, I blamed myself. I thought I was just distracted or forgetful. But the unease did not go away. I began to double-check everything. I took photos of how I left rooms before going out, just to prove to myself that I was not losing my mind. Still, I came home to subtle changes. The couch cushion was slightly indented, as if someone had just been sitting there. I lived alone, in a small house I inherited from my grandmother. It was quiet, nestled at the end of a street no one really drove down unless they lived nearby. I worked from home, but I would leave now and then to run errands or grab groceries. Those were the times when the changes occurred, always while I was away. The idea of someone breaking in while I was gone scared me. I installed a camera facing the front door. The footage showed nothing unusual. No one entering, no one leaving. Still, things kept happening inside. One night, I placed a small line of baby powder on the hallway floor. I left for a walk and returned an hour later. There were faint smudges in the powder. Not full footprints, just enough to suggest movement. That was when I started to suspect someone was inside my home. I did not want to believe it. I checked every closet, every crawl space, under every bed. Nothing. Everything was still and quiet, and yet I could feel it. That horrible prickling sense that someone was watching me. Then I remembered the attic. I had not been up there in years. The entrance was one of those ceiling hatches with a pull-down ladder. I always assumed it was too cramped for anyone to live in. But I could not ignore the possibility anymore. I decided I would go up there the next day, The morning was bright and clear. I stood beneath the attic entrance with my phone light in one hand and a broom in the other, just in case. Pulling down the ladder was harder than I expected. Dust rained down, and I coughed as I climbed up. The air smelled musty, thick with old wood and insulation. At first I saw nothing but cobwebs and boxes. Then my light caught something strange. A sleeping bag. A pile of wrappers. Half a loaf of bread, slightly moldy, tucked beside a backpack. My heart pounded. Someone had been living here. They had built a small nest in the far corner, hidden behind insulation panels. Clothes were folded neatly beside a milk crate filled with toiletries. There was even a book lying open, its pages dog-eared and worn. It was clear they had been here for a while, long enough to settle in. I backed down the ladder, hands shaking. I did not know if they were still up there or had stepped out while I was home. The thought made my skin crawl. I locked my bedroom door that night and slept with a knife under my pillow. Every creak made me flinch. The next morning I called the police. I did not tell them everything, just that I thought someone had been squatting in my attic. They arrived quickly, 2 officers checking the house while I waited outside. One of them climbed into the attic with a flashlight and a gun. Minutes passed before he called out that it was clear. They said whoever it was had already left. Probably gone when I stepped out for a walk or to the store. They collected the items from the attic for evidence. I changed the locks that afternoon. I told myself it was over. But it was not. A week later, I found my toothbrush wet even though I had not used it that day. The fridge door was left slightly ajar. Once I heard footsteps above me in the ceiling while I was watching TV. Not rats or wood creaks, real footsteps. I set up more cameras inside the house, one in the living room, one facing the hallway, another in the kitchen. That night I left the house for 2 hours. I returned and reviewed the footage immediately. What I saw made my stomach turn. A man, thin, gaunt, barefoot. He dropped from the attic entrance like he had done it 100 times. He moved quickly, checking the rooms, opening the fridge, sipping from a bottle of juice. Then he disappeared back up the ladder, all within 20 minutes. He had been living above me this whole time, slipping out only when I was gone. I called the police again and showed them the footage. They swept the attic but found nothing. It was empty, the bedding gone, the crate missing. They said he had probably seen the cameras and decided to leave for good. Still, I did not feel safe. I could not sleep. I kept hearing noises. I started staying with a friend across town. I only returned to collect mail and check on things. But every time I felt that same chill, like someone was watching from the shadows. Eventually, I decided to sell the house. I packed everything, tossing out anything I did not need. While clearing the attic for the last time, I found something wedged behind a beam. A note scribbled on the back of a receipt. It read, "Thank you for the shelter. Sorry for the trouble. I never meant to scare you." There was no name, just that small apology. I stood there for a long time, holding the note in silence. I did not know how to feel. Angry? Relieved? Sad? Whoever he was gone now, and I was free to leave the fear behind. The house sold within a month. I moved into a small apartment with better locks, a doorman, and cameras in every hallway. I told myself I would never ignore those small signs again. Life returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could. But sometimes, late at night, I still think about that attic, or about the man who watched from above while I lived unaware. And I wonder what his story was. What drove him to hide in someone else's home? I hope he found help. I hope he found peace. Because even though he frightened me, he never hurt me. And maybe in some strange way we both needed shelter during a hard time. But I do not look up at ceilings the same way anymore. I listen more closely to the quiet. I check the locks 3 times before bed. But I also leave a little room in my mind for grace. Not everyone who hides in the dark is trying to do harm. Story 7. I hired the cleaning lady from a popular local website. Her reviews were glowing and she seemed affordable, punctual, and polite in her messages. She showed up wearing a faded uniform and carrying a single, worn-out bag. At first glance, she looked tired but determined, like someone who had been through hard times. I welcomed her into my apartment and showed her around. She nodded silently as I explained the rooms and the tasks I expected. She barely spoke, only grunting in acknowledgement now and then. Something about her silence unsettled me, but I brushed it off. Maybe she was just shy or uncomfortable around strangers. I left her alone to begin her work while I returned to my home office. The first few days went smoothly enough. She was efficient and thorough, cleaning corners I had long neglected. She arrived every morning at 9 a.m. sharp and left before 5 p.m. I appreciated her consistency and gradually grew used to her presence. Still, I noticed she never smiled and rarely made eye contact. By the end of the first week, I noticed a few odd things. She started staying a little later each day, always with the excuse that she wanted to finish something. Once I found her rearranging items in my closet without being asked. She apologized quietly and returned to vacuuming, and I let it go, figuring she meant well. But the feeling of unease started to build in the back of my mind. On the 10th day, she asked if she could store her bag in my hall closet. I agreed, thinking it was a harmless request. The closet was mostly empty and I did not mind the gesture. It was easier than having her leave it lying around. But I started to hear strange noises at night, soft shifting, like someone moving quietly. At first I thought it was my imagination or just the building settling. My apartment had always creaked in certain places after dark. Still, the sound seemed to come from the hallway, right outside my bedroom. It kept happening every night, at roughly the same time, around 2 a.m. I decided to check the closet one morning before she arrived. Her bag was there, but there were also blankets, a water bottle, and an empty food container. It looked like someone had made a makeshift bed inside. My heart dropped as I stared at the mess, realizing she had not been leaving at all. She had been hiding in my closet and sleeping there at night. When she arrived that day, I confronted her gently. I asked her why she had not been going home and if everything was all right. She stared at me blankly for a long moment before whispering that she had nowhere else to go. She promised she would not bother me and begged me to let her stay just a few more days. Her voice trembled, and I felt a strange mix of pity and fear. I told her it was not acceptable and that I needed my space. She nodded but said nothing else, then returned to dusting the windowsills. That night I locked my bedroom door and barely slept. I kept hearing soft thumps again, like footsteps too quiet to be normal. I knew I had to do something, but I did not want to make the situation worse. The next morning, I told her she could no longer work for me. I said I would pay her for the rest of the week, but she needed to leave immediately. She did not argue, but her eyes stayed locked on mine in a way that made me deeply uncomfortable. I left the apartment for a few hours to give her time to pack and go. When I returned, the door was unlocked. My chest tightened as I walked inside and found the place eerily quiet. Her bag was gone, and I thought maybe she had left without any more trouble. But something felt wrong. I walked slowly down the hall and opened the closet door. It was empty, no blankets, no food, nothing. Just a faint trace of her perfume lingering in the air. That night I heard the noises again. Louder this time, unmistakably human. I called out, trying to sound brave, but no one answered. I crept to the closet and flung it open. Nothing. I checked every room and found no sign of her. Still, the feeling that I was not alone stayed heavy in my chest. The next few nights were quiet, and I started to convince myself that it was all over. Maybe she had moved on, maybe it was just a rough patch in her life. I started sleeping normally again, even stopped locking my bedroom door. But one night I woke up to the sound of breathing. Not mine, someone else's. I turned on the light and scanned the room, heart pounding. Nothing was out of place. I stood up and walked to the closet, slowly reaching for the doorknob. I hesitated, then opened it. She was there, crouched in the dark, staring up at me with wide, glassy eyes. She did not speak. She did not move. She just stared. I backed away and grabbed my phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. The dispatcher stayed on the line as I waited in the living room, afraid to go back to the closet. When the police arrived, they found her still inside, unresponsive. She did not resist. They took her away in silence, and I watched from the couch, wrapped in a blanket and shaking. The officers told me later that she had no permanent address and no emergency contacts. She had been living in different closets and storage rooms for months, moving from one place to another. Somehow, she had found a way to survive without anyone noticing. They said I was lucky it ended without violence. I nodded, though I did not feel lucky. It took me weeks to feel normal in my own home again. I changed the locks, installed security cameras, and kept my bedroom door closed every night. I stopped hiring help from unverified sources. I even started sleeping with a light on, something I had not done since childhood. I needed time to feel safe again. Eventually, the fear began to fade. I took back control of my space and slowly reestablished a sense of normalcy. I talked to friends, even a therapist, and allowed myself to process what had happened. I realized that not all dangers scream or shout, some simply hide and wait. But I also learned how resilient I could be when I needed to be. In the end, I chose not to be afraid of my home anymore. I moved past the shock, cleaned out the closet myself, and reclaimed every inch of space she had taken. What started as a simple act of hiring help turned into something I could never have predicted. But I survived it. I took back my life and my home, one day at a time. Story 8. When I first met his parents, I was nervous but excited. He had spoken of them in such glowing terms that I wanted to make a good impression. I wore my best dress and practiced my polite smile in the mirror. But the moment his mother opened the door and saw me, her face froze. Her eyes widened, and then she said a name that was not mine. At first, I thought I had misheard her. Maybe the nerves were making me imagine things. But then his father joined us in the living room and called me by the same name. I gave them a confused smile and gently corrected them. They both laughed nervously and apologized, blaming it on old habits. He squeezed my hand reassuringly and whispered that they would get used to me. Still, something in the way his parents looked at me made me uncomfortable. His mother kept staring at me like she was studying my face, searching for something familiar. His father asked me questions that felt oddly personal. They wanted to know about my childhood, my parents, and where I had gone to school. When they asked if I had ever lived in their town before, I said no. I had only met their son when we both moved for work. But they exchanged another strange look at my answer. He brushed it off again, telling me not to worry about it. He said they had a hard time letting go of the past. It was not until the third visit that I began to feel genuinely uneasy. His mother called me the wrong name again, and this time she did not correct herself. His father smiled warmly, nodding along like everything was fine. When I tried to bring it up with him afterward, he shrugged and said they were just old and forgetful. But I could not shake the feeling that there was more to it. One evening, while helping clean up after dinner, I asked his mother about the person whose name she kept calling me. Her hand stilled over the sink for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, that she had been like a daughter to them once. She said she disappeared one evening and never came back. No one ever found her or figured out what happened. She told me they still held out hope, even though it had been years. I apologized for bringing up painful memories and tried to steer the conversation in another direction. But later that night, I asked him directly about her. He looked annoyed but not surprised. He told me she had been his girlfriend a long time ago, and they had dated for over 2 years. She had vanished one summer evening, and the police never found any clues. He insisted he had nothing to do with it. He said he had moved on, and so should his parents. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe that there was a simple explanation for everything. But the more time I spent with his family, the more I began to notice little things that disturbed me. His mother had pictures of her all over the house. Not a single one included me, even though we had been together for almost a year. I once found a drawer in the hallway filled with mementos that clearly belonged to someone else. A bracelet, a journal, an old scarf. Things that looked well used and well loved. I did not dare touch them for long. The journal was half full of entries written in neat, rounded handwriting. I flipped through it quickly, just enough to read a few lines. They were about him, about how she was worried he was hiding things, about how she was starting to feel afraid. I put the journal back where I found it and shut the drawer. That night I told him I found it while looking for a pen. He looked tense and said those were his mother's things. I did not press further, but a knot of dread settled in my chest. Something was wrong, and I could feel it in my bones. Things got worse after that. His parents stopped pretending to correct themselves. They only ever used her name when they spoke to me. Even when I corrected them, they would nod and say yes, of course, then use her name again 5 minutes later. It started affecting our relationship. I asked him to talk to them, to tell them how much it bothered me. He said he did, but nothing changed. I began to wonder if he was even trying. I began to wonder if he even wanted them to stop. The turning point came one weekend when we stayed over at his parents' house. I woke up in the middle of the night to find his mother standing at the foot of the bed. She was staring at me, her eyes wide and full of something I could not name. I asked her if she was okay, but she just whispered the name again and walked out. I barely slept after that. The next morning I told him I wanted to leave early. He argued with me, saying his parents would be hurt. But I had reached my limit. I packed my bag and waited by the car until he finally came out and drove me home. I decided to take some time apart. I told him I needed space to think. He seemed frustrated but agreed. For a week I stayed at a friend's place and tried to clear my head. That was when I decided to do my own digging. I went to the library in his hometown and searched through old newspaper articles. I found dozens of stories about her disappearance. Most were filled with speculation and vague statements. But one thing kept showing up in all of them. She had been planning to break up with him. She had told her friends she was afraid of what he might do. She had started keeping a journal, just in case. My blood went cold when I read that. I remembered the journal in his parents' house. I remembered the entries about fear. I realized that I might have been living out the same story. I went to the police and told them everything I had experienced. They listened carefully and took notes. They asked for details, timelines, and descriptions. I gave them what I could. They told me they would look into it but not to expect immediate answers. I broke up with him that night. I told him it was over and that I never wanted to see him again. He looked shocked at first, then angry. He accused me of snooping and said I was paranoid. But I knew I had made the right decision. In the weeks that followed, the police reopened the case. They searched his parents' house again. This time, they found more than just old mementos. They found clothing buried in the backyard that matched what she had last been seen wearing. They found traces of her DNA in the crawl space under the house. He was arrested soon after. So were his parents. It turned out they had all been involved in covering up what happened. She had tried to leave him, and they had made sure she never could. The truth unraveled piece by piece, but in the end, justice came for her. I testified in court. I told them everything I had seen, heard, and felt. The jury believed me. He and his parents were sentenced and taken away. I walked out of the courthouse feeling like I could breathe for the first time in months. It took time to recover. I had nightmares for a while. I kept wondering how close I had come to ending up just like her. But I also felt something else. Gratitude. Gratitude that I had listened to my instincts. Now I live in a new city, far away from all of it. I have a job I enjoy and friends who support me. I still think about her sometimes, and about how her story helped save mine. And every time I look in the mirror, I remind myself that I am not her. I am me, and I survived. Story 9. I had just put the baby down for the night. The apartment was quiet except for the gentle hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the floorboards. I sat in the living room, half watching a show while scrolling through my phone. It had become part of my nightly routine since the baby was born. The monitor sat next to me, its small screen glowing softly in the dark room. I glanced at it, expecting the usual view of the crib and the nightlight casting shadows across the wall. Instead, my heart stopped. There was a man standing in the hallway just beyond the doorway to the nursery. He was still, unmoving, and facing the baby's room. I stared at the screen, frozen, hoping it was a glitch. But it was not a glitch. The hallway light was off, yet I could see him clearly on the monitor, thanks to the infrared night vision. He stood tall, almost too tall, with broad shoulders and a dark outline that did not match anything I owned. But the baby monitor had no sound at that moment, so I could not hear if he was making any noise. I reached for my phone with trembling hands. My first instinct was to call someone, anyone. I punched in the numbers for 911 and waited as the line rang. My voice came out low and shaky as I told the dispatcher what I saw. She told me to remain calm and stay on the line. I was instructed to lock the door to the living room and wait for help. I crept to the door and turned the lock slowly, not wanting to make a sound. The silence in the apartment had become oppressive, like a thick fog pressing against my ears. I moved back to the monitor, hoping to see that the man was gone. Instead, he had moved closer to the nursery door. I bit back a sob and pressed the phone harder against my ear. The dispatcher asked if I could still see him. I told her yes, that he had moved and was just standing there. I whispered that I lived alone, that no one should be in the apartment with me. She told me officers were en route and would be there in minutes. I sat there, knees pulled up, staring at the screen and willing the man to disappear. The minutes dragged like hours. Then on the monitor he turned his head, slowly, as if he knew I was watching. Though I could not see his face clearly, I felt his gaze cut through the camera lens and find me in the other room. I almost dropped the phone. He started walking again. He passed by the monitor's field of view, and for a moment he was gone. My heart pounded in my chest so loudly I could barely hear the dispatcher. I stood up, unsure of what to do next. Should I run? No. Hide? I had no weapon. The only thing in reach was a heavy candle holder on the side table. The creak of a floorboard pulled my attention back to the hallway. It was not the baby's room. It was closer. Much closer. I held my breath, candle holder gripped tight in my hand, and listened. There was nothing. Silence again, but I knew he was still there. Then the baby started crying. A sharp, piercing wail that shattered the tension like glass. I lunged for the monitor, needing to see if the man was in the room. He was not. The crib was empty. I could still hear the crying, so I knew the baby had to be there, but the camera showed nothing. My hands began to shake. I whispered into the phone that the baby was gone from the crib. The dispatcher asked me to stay calm and reminded me the officers were almost there. She asked if I could hear anything else. I said no, only the baby crying. She asked me to stay where I was, but I could not. I had to check. Every instinct told me it was a bad idea, but I could not sit still. I unlocked the door and crept down the hallway, every step deliberate and silent. The crying grew louder as I approached the nursery. I could see the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was empty. The crib was empty. The mobile above it was still spinning, slowly. The crying had stopped. I stood there, staring, waiting for something to move. Nothing did. I turned to check the closet, but just as I did, I heard footsteps behind me. I whipped around, ready to swing the candle holder. But there was no one there. The hallway was empty. My breath came in ragged gasps. I backed out of the nursery, not taking my eyes off the hallway. I made it back to the living room, just as the front door burst open. 2 officers rushed in, weapons drawn, shouting commands I could barely understand. I dropped the candle holder and raised my hands. They searched the apartment thoroughly while another officer stayed with me. They found no one. Every room, every closet, even the attic. Nothing. No signs of forced entry. No signs anyone had been there at all. I kept repeating that I saw him on the monitor, that the baby had vanished from the crib. The baby was later found asleep in a laundry basket in the hallway. I had never put the baby there. I was sure of it. The officers were kind but unconvinced. They said I may have fallen asleep and dreamed it all. That stress and sleep deprivation could do strange things. But I knew I had been awake. I knew what I had seen. They left after making sure all the locks were working and advised me to get some rest. I sat on the couch, holding the baby, and watched the monitor screen. It showed only the empty crib and the softly glowing nightlight. I stayed up until morning, watching, waiting. The next day, I replaced the baby monitor with a new one. I installed extra locks and bought a security camera system. For days, I slept with one eye open, and the monitor never left my side. There were no more sightings. No more strange events. Nothing happened again. But I will never forget the way that man looked into the camera. I will never forget the sound of the crying when the crib was empty. I never found out who he was or how he got in. I only know I am not as alone as I used to think. And I never fully trust silence anymore. Story 10. When I first saw the ad for a used mattress online, I barely hesitated. My old one was sagging so badly that my back ached each morning, and this one looked clean enough in the photos. It was cheap, just within my budget, and the seller sounded polite over the phone. They offered to deliver it for a small extra fee, and I agreed right away. The mattress arrived in plastic wrapping, and I helped the man carry it up the stairs to my apartment. The plastic wrap had a faint smell, something chemical and sour, but I chalked it up to storage. He set the mattress down in my room and left quickly, barely making eye contact. I peeled the plastic off, holding my breath, and was relieved to see a nearly spotless surface. It was firm, just the way I liked it, and it fit my bed frame perfectly. That night, I lay down on it with a small sense of victory, thinking how lucky I was to have found such a deal. The smell, however, didn't go away. It lingered around the bed, seeping into the room like steam. At first, I thought it was my imagination, or that maybe the fabric cleaner I used didn't work well. I sprayed the surface with disinfectant and left the windows open, but even after hours of airing, the scent stayed. It was faint but unmistakable, like copper and mold mixed together. Sleeping on it became more difficult with each passing night. I started waking up with headaches and a strange metallic taste in my mouth. I blamed it on stress, poor diet, and lack of proper rest. Still, a part of me grew increasingly uncomfortable with the mattress. I couldn't explain why, but it felt wrong, like it did not belong in my home. One morning, after another restless night, I decided to flip it over. I wanted to check the other side to see if maybe something had spilled or soaked into it. As soon as I lifted the edge, a deep red patch came into view. It spread from the center outward, dry and stiff to the touch, darker in some areas like it had pooled. My stomach dropped, and I froze for several seconds before pulling the mattress up fully. The underside was soaked through with what was clearly dried blood. Not a little spot, not a stain from a nosebleed or a minor accident, but a massive stain that had saturated the entire bottom half. I backed away, my heart pounding, bile rising in my throat. I could not comprehend how I had slept on it for nearly a week. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to get away from it. I grabbed my phone and searched for the seller's number, but it was disconnected. The online ad had been removed, and the username on the listing platform no longer existed. I searched my messages and realized I had never gotten a full name or any traceable detail. Just a number, now dead. Panic settled over me as the gravity of the situation became clear. I called building management, asking if they had footage of the man who helped deliver it. They told me the cameras were for show, not actually recording. I asked my neighbors if they had seen anything strange that day, but no one remembered seeing a delivery van or an unfamiliar face. It was like the man had appeared and disappeared without leaving any trace. I was completely on my own. I rolled the mattress up as best as I could and shoved it out the door. I dragged it down the hallway, down the stairs, and out to the dumpster. It took all my strength to lift it in, and even then, it barely fit. I stood there staring at it for a long time, the bloodstains still vivid in my mind. I could not believe I had been sleeping on something that might have been involved in something awful. After that, I spent the night on the couch. I could not shake the feeling that something had followed me out of that mattress. My dreams were filled with dark shapes and muffled cries, and I kept waking up drenched in sweat. I began to feel like I was being watched, like someone was just outside my line of vision at all times. I even checked the locks on my doors and windows every hour, convinced they were not secure enough. The next day, I bought a brand new mattress from a local store. It was more expensive, but I needed the peace of mind. I had it delivered directly from the store and watched the entire process. No middlemen, no strangers, no shady transactions. When it was set up in my room, the space felt different, lighter somehow. But the smell did not go away. Even without the blood-soaked mattress, there was still that coppery, rotting odor. I cleaned the entire room, washed every sheet, sprayed disinfectant in every corner. I even pulled up the carpet beneath the bed to check for mold or hidden spills. Nothing explained why the air still held that metallic scent. Out of desperation, I called a professional cleaner. He walked in, sniffed the air once, and frowned. He said it smelled like decomposition. I told him about the mattress, about the blood, and watched the color drain from his face. He asked if I had called the police, and I realized I had not. I had been too frightened, too ashamed to tell anyone what I had found. The officer who came later listened carefully. He asked questions I had no answers to. Where did I get the mattress? What did the man look like? Did I take any photos? I had none. The officer took a report and left, but not before suggesting I keep my doors locked and call if anything else happened. I felt no safer after that. That night, I lay on the new mattress and stared at the ceiling. I kept thinking about the blood, about how much of it there had been. A body had to bleed that much. It was not normal, not explainable by any natural cause. That stain had a story, one I was not supposed to know. Days passed and the smell began to fade. Slowly, the air in my room started to feel normal again. My sleep improved, though I still woke sometimes in the middle of the night, heart racing. I never went looking for the man who sold it to me. I did not want to know who he was or what he had done. Some truths do not make things better. Months went by, and I moved to a new apartment across town. I donated most of my old furniture and left the memory of that mattress behind. My new place felt clean and safe, untouched by the shadows of the past. I painted the walls, bought fresh sheets, and started over. The nightmares stopped, and I began to live normally again. Sometimes, though, when I walk past alleys or dumpsters, a smell will drift by and stop me cold. It is never strong, just a whisper of something rusted and ancient. I turn quickly, heart pounding, but there is never anything there. It is probably nothing, probably just in my head. Still, I never buy anything used anymore. No furniture, no clothes, not even kitchen utensils. If something comes into my home, it is sealed and brand new. I would rather spend more than wonder what secrets lie hidden just beneath the surface. Some deals come too cheap for a reason. Story 11. It started with the battery on my phone dying faster than usual. At first, I thought maybe the old battery was just wearing out, but the drop was sudden and drastic. 1 minute I would have nearly full charge, and within an hour it would be almost empty. I checked the settings and noticed an unfamiliar app using more power than any other. It was strange because I had never seen or downloaded that app before. Curious and a little worried, I tried to open the app to see what it was, but it was hidden deep in the system files. The icon was a blank square, and the name was a random string of letters and numbers that made no sense. I could not uninstall it through normal means, and the app seemed to restart automatically after I rebooted the phone. I felt a chill, wondering if someone had hacked into my phone. I reached out to a tech-savvy friend who knew more about phone security. They asked me to send a screenshot of the app's details and promised to help investigate. A few hours later, they called and told me the app was a form of spyware. It was designed to track my movements, listen to conversations, and capture everything I typed. The thought of being watched so closely terrified me. For the next few days, I kept my phone off as much as possible, only turning it on when necessary. I used a backup phone I had tucked away, hoping to avoid any further spying. But it felt like the app was waiting for me to slip up, always watching, always gathering data. I started feeling paranoid even when I was alone. Every notification sound made me jump. I tried searching online for solutions to remove the spyware, but most instructions were complicated or required rooting the phone, which I was not comfortable doing. I feared I might accidentally delete important files or make the problem worse. My friend suggested factory resetting the device, but even that might not fully erase the app if it had hidden itself deep in the system. I felt trapped. The situation got worse when the battery began to drain even faster. Sometimes it would go from full to empty in less than an hour. I noticed the phone getting hot even when it was just sitting on the table unused. I realized the app was running in the background constantly, feeding data somewhere else. I could not stop the anxiety building inside me. One evening, I sat down and wrote everything out in a journal. The paranoia, the sleepless nights, the feeling of invasion. It was exhausting and isolating, and I wondered who wanted to spy on me. I had not shared any secrets or involved myself in anything suspicious. The idea that someone could watch me without my knowledge felt like a nightmare come true. Determined to take action, I went to a professional phone repair shop the next day. I explained the situation and asked if they could help identify and remove the spyware. The technician examined the phone with specialized tools and confirmed that the app was indeed malicious software planted remotely. They told me the only safe solution was to replace the phone entirely. It was a hard pill to swallow. I decided to buy a new phone, but before switching, I backed up everything important to an external drive, careful not to transfer any malware. The technician helped me wipe the old phone clean and reinstall the original operating system, but warned me to be cautious in the future. They gave me tips on how to secure my new device, including using strong passwords, two-factor authentication, and avoiding suspicious links. I felt a little relief knowing I had support. After setting up the new phone, I felt a strange mix of freedom and vulnerability. The battery held its charge, the strange app was gone, and the constant feeling of being watched vanished. But the experience left a mark. I became hyper-aware of digital privacy and cautious about every download and connection. My phone, once just a tool, had become a window into my life for someone else. Weeks passed, and the nightmare started to fade. I returned to normal routines and even started sleeping better. Yet, I still checked the app list regularly, looking for anything out of place. It became a habit, a way to protect myself from being hurt again. I realized that while the technology could invade, I had regained control through knowledge and vigilance. One afternoon, I received an unexpected message from a cybersecurity group thanking me for reporting suspicious activity. They had traced similar spyware to a hacking ring targeting ordinary people, not just high-profile targets. My report had helped them uncover a larger network. That small victory made me feel empowered, like I had turned my fear into something positive. Reflecting on everything, I understood how important it is to guard privacy fiercely in this connected world. The experience taught me that technology can be both a blessing and a danger. I could not erase the feeling of invasion entirely, but I had learned to stand strong against it. I was no longer just a target. I was someone who fought back. In the end, the mysterious app was gone, but the lessons remained. I took comfort in knowing that awareness and action are the best defenses. And while I never found out exactly who was spying on me, I found peace in reclaiming my life and my privacy. It was a hard journey, but I came out stronger on the other side. Story 12. It started one evening while I was cooking dinner. The smart speaker in the kitchen suddenly spoke up without me saying anything. The voice was unfamiliar, not the usual calm, robotic tone I was used to. Instead, it sounded colder, sharper, almost like someone else was controlling it. But I froze for a moment, unsure if I had imagined it or if the device was malfunctioning. I tried to brush it off as a glitch. Maybe the speaker had picked up some background noise or a command from the TV. I told it to play my favorite playlist, and it obeyed as normal, no strange interruptions. Still, the odd voice lingered in my mind, making me feel uneasy as I ate my meal. I decided to keep an eye on it just in case. The next day, while working from home, I heard the speaker respond again. This time it was during a video call with a coworker. Out of nowhere, it answered a question that no one had asked it. The voice was clearer now, and I recognized that it did not belong to the usual assistant. My heart raced as I looked around, but there was no one else in the room. I felt like I was losing my mind. I checked the device's settings immediately. Nothing seemed out of place. No new apps or updates had been installed. I unplugged the speaker for a while, thinking a reboot might help. When I plugged it back in, it was silent for hours. I started to feel relieved. Maybe the problem was just a temporary glitch after all. That night, however, the strange voice returned louder than before. It spoke in sentences that made no sense, but somehow sounded like warnings. It said things like they are coming, and you cannot hide. My hands trembled as I listened, unsure whether to be scared or call for help. I reached for my phone but hesitated, wondering if this was some twisted joke or a software bug. I muted the speaker and put it in another room. I thought distance might help calm the situation. But even then, I could hear faint whispers from it. The voice was distorted but persistent, repeating fragments of strange phrases. I knew then that unplugging it was the only way to stop the madness, at least temporarily. The next day, I did some research online. I found forums where people shared stories about hacked devices and smart assistants behaving strangely. Some claimed their speakers had been taken over by strangers. Others spoke of mysterious voices coming through. I felt less alone but more anxious. Was someone really inside my home through this device? I reset the speaker to factory settings and changed all my passwords. I also updated the security on my home network. I wanted to believe that would be enough to stop whoever or whatever was messing with me. But as the evening came, my phone buzzed with an alert. It was a notification from the speaker's app, even though the device was still unplugged. The message was cryptic. It said, "We are closer than you think." I stared at the screen, cold sweat forming on my forehead. I called the company's support line and explained everything. The representative was polite but told me they had no record of unusual activity on my device. They suggested I replace it, saying it might be a rare hardware issue. I bought a new speaker the next day and set it up carefully. For a while, everything seemed normal. No strange voices, no random responses. I felt the tension in my chest ease a little. But deep down, I still wondered if the first device had been more than just a machine acting up. One evening, about a week later, I heard a sound from the new speaker. It was faint but clear. The voice I had tried so hard to forget was back. It said, "You cannot run." I dropped the remote and rushed to unplug the device. I felt trapped and terrified, realizing that the problem had not been with the speaker itself but something or someone connected to it. I decided to cut off all smart devices in my home. No more speakers, no cameras, nothing that could be hacked or controlled remotely. I went old school, using a regular alarm clock and a landline phone. It was inconvenient, but my peace of mind was worth it. I also installed extra locks on the doors and windows, making sure no one could enter unnoticed. Slowly, the strange occurrences stopped. The house felt quiet again, the oppressive feeling lifting from the walls. I even started to sleep better, no longer fearing the voice in the night. I realized how vulnerable I had been relying so much on technology without fully understanding the risks. Now I was more careful and vigilant. Months passed with no incidents. I reconnected with old friends and spent more time outside, away from screens and devices. I learned to trust my instincts more and to question what felt off. The voice had disappeared, and with it, the nightmare seemed to end. I still think about it sometimes, but I refuse to let fear control me. In the end, I found strength in reclaiming my privacy in my life. Technology is a tool, not a master, and I would never forget that lesson. The smart speaker had been a gateway to something dark, but I closed that door. Now I live cautiously but freely, knowing I survived the unseen threat inside my own home. Story 13. I was scrolling through a forum late one night, one I had never visited before. The website was strange, filled with obscure posts and strange usernames. Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on a link that promised something shocking. What I saw stopped me cold. It was a live video feed, showing the inside of a bedroom that looked eerily familiar. At first, I thought it was a prank or a badly made video. But then I realized that the room on the screen was mine. The exact same furniture, The same cluttered desk by the window, the pile of clothes on the chair. I sat frozen, staring at the screen, my heart pounding. Someone was broadcasting my bedroom live without my knowledge. I immediately looked around my room, half expecting to find a camera hidden somewhere. I checked the usual places, behind the curtains, on shelves, inside lamps, but found nothing. My skin prickled with fear and confusion. How could someone have a feed like that without me knowing? The stream was low quality, but I could see the movements clearly. It was nighttime, and I could see my bed, the door to my closet, and the dim glow of my bedside lamp. Someone was watching me, maybe even right now. The thought of being observed so closely made me want to scream or run. I closed the laptop and tried to calm myself down. Maybe it was a setup, someone posting a video they found somewhere else and pretending it was mine. But deep down, I knew it was not. There were details in the room that no one else could know, like the small sticker on my laptop and the pattern on my pillowcase. The video was real, and it was mine. I debated what to do next. I did not want to panic and call the police without more proof. But I also could not ignore it. My phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number, just 3 words, "I see you." My breath caught in my throat. This was no longer a joke. That night I barely slept. I kept checking my phone for messages in my room for any signs of intrusion. The feeling of being watched did not go away. Every shadow seemed to hide someone. Every sound made me jump. I wanted to tell someone, but I felt embarrassed, afraid people would think I was crazy. The next morning, I checked the forum again. The live stream was gone. The post was deleted. But I had taken a screenshot of the page, the video window, and the disturbing message. I showed it to a friend I trusted, someone who was good with computers. They agreed it was serious and said I should consider changing all my passwords and improving my security. I followed their advice and started by changing every password I used online. I enabled 2-factor authentication on all my accounts and bought a small security camera for my room. It was not to spy on myself, but to catch anyone who might come in uninvited. The camera arrived a few days later, and I set it up near the entrance of my bedroom. Weeks passed with no sign of the live stream or any strange activity. I felt safer, but the fear lingered in the back of my mind. Then one evening, while checking the security footage, I noticed something odd. A shadow moved across the hallway outside my door. I paused the video, zoomed in, but could not identify what it was. I started locking my bedroom door every night, something I never did before. The idea that someone could sneak in terrified me. I even considered moving out, but that felt like giving up. I wanted to protect my space, my life, and my peace of mind without running away. One afternoon, my phone rang. It was an unknown number again. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. A voice spoke softly, almost a whisper, saying that I should stop looking for answers. The line went dead before I could reply. I sat frozen, clutching the phone. I contacted the police and reported everything, including the live stream, the messages, and the shadow on the camera. They said they would open an investigation, but warned me it might take time. In the meantime, they advised me to stay vigilant and not confront anyone if I suspected a threat. Days later, I found an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a small USB drive with no note. I was terrified to plug it into my computer, but knew I had to see what was on it. The file contained a short video showing someone entering my apartment when I was not home. The figure's face was obscured, but the posture was familiar. I showed the footage to the police, and they promised to use it as part of their investigation. I never found out who the person was, but I stopped receiving strange messages and did not see the live stream again. It felt like they knew I was watching, and that was enough to scare them off. Over time, I regained some of my confidence. I still felt uneasy about the invasion, but I learned to protect myself better. The security camera stayed in place, and I never again ignored the feeling that something was wrong. I became more careful about my online presence and who I trusted. The experience changed me. I was no longer as carefree as before, but I was stronger. I learned that sometimes danger comes from places you least expect, even your own home. And that taking control, no matter how small, is the first step toward feeling safe again. One quiet evening, I sat by my window, the soft glow of the city lights outside. I realized I had reclaimed my space, my privacy, and my peace. The nightmare had passed, and though the scars remained, I was no longer afraid to live in my own room. The fear that someone was watching had finally faded away. Story 14. I was running late for an important meeting when I decided to order a rideshare. My phone showed the estimated arrival time, and I watched the little car icon inch closer on the map. When he arrived, I felt relieved. It was a rainy evening, and the streets were slick with water. I hopped in the back seat without a second thought. As soon as we pulled away, I noticed he did not follow the GPS directions. Instead of taking the usual route through the main roads, he turned onto a narrow side street. I glanced at the screen, but the driver seemed determined to ignore it. I politely asked if he was sure about the route. He smiled and said, "I know a shortcut." The shortcut did not feel right. The streets got darker, emptier. The buildings became older, more run down. I started to feel uneasy. I looked around for other cars, but the area was deserted. The driver did not say much, just kept his eyes on the road. I tried calling the meeting organizer to explain I might be late. My hands were shaking slightly as I typed out the message. The signal dropped out suddenly, leaving me disconnected. I felt a pit grow in my stomach. Why was this happening now? The driver took a sharp turn onto a gravel road, and my heart sank. We were no longer on paved streets. All fences with barbed wire loomed on either side. The rain made the gravel slick and noisy under the tires. I realized this was not a shortcut. This was something else entirely. I asked him again to turn back. He gave me a blank look and said, "We will be there soon." I looked through the window. There was nothing but old factories, broken windows, and empty lots. No street lights, no other people. The kind of place you see in horror movies. My mind raced. I opened the door handle to get out, but it was locked. I leaned forward and told him firmly, "I want to get out now." He glanced at me briefly, then back at the road. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. I felt trapped. My phone was dead. No help coming. Suddenly, the car stopped near an abandoned warehouse. The driver turned to look at me, his face unreadable in the dim light. I tried to keep calm, asking him again why we were here. He said nothing. My heart pounded so loud I was sure he could hear it. I noticed the glove compartment was slightly open. I reached over and pulled it fully open. Inside was a small flashlight and a tire iron. I grabbed the tire iron and held it tightly in my lap. The driver's silence made me more scared than any words could. In its past intense silence, I stared out the window, looking for anything that might help me escape. Then I saw a shadow moving behind the warehouse. My mind jumped to worst-case scenarios, but I knew I had to stay alert. Panic would only make things worse. I decided to try talking to the driver again, this time more calmly. I asked if everything was okay, if he needed help. He said, "I just wanted to show you something." My hands clenched the tire iron tighter. I was not sure what that meant, but it did not sound good. I noticed a small door on the side of the warehouse slightly ajar. The driver reached for the door handle and tried to open it, but it was stuck. I took a deep breath and said, "Let me try." He nodded reluctantly. I pushed the door open wider and a rush of cold, damp air hit us both. Inside was dark, but not pitch black. The flashlight from the glove compartment helped. There were crates stacked everywhere and the smell of old machinery. I looked around quickly for exits. I spotted a metal ladder leading to a window above. The driver was watching me closely. I said, "I am going to climb out." He nodded again, almost like he was waiting for me to do it. My heart was still racing, but I moved quickly. I climbed the ladder and pushed the window open. The cold night air hit my face. I pulled myself out onto the roof. From there, I could see the city lights in the distance. I jumped down to the ground carefully. My legs shook as I ran towards the fence at the edge of the property. I heard footsteps behind me and dared to look back. The driver was following, but slower now. I reached the fence and found a gap where the wire had been cut. I squeezed through and did not stop running until I was on a busy street again. I flagged down a passing car and asked for help. The driver stopped immediately and called the police. When the officers arrived, I told them everything. They searched the area but found no sign of the rideshare driver. My phone was dead, so I had no way to identify him. The police said they would check the app for the driver's information and get back to me. I stayed at a nearby cafe until I felt calm enough to go home. The city felt different now, less safe. I kept looking over my shoulder. I could not stop thinking about how close I had come to danger. I deleted the rideshare app from my phone the next morning. Weeks passed with no word from the police. The incident haunted my thoughts, but I tried to move on. I took a taxi whenever I needed to get somewhere. I avoided rideshares completely. The feeling of being trapped and helpless stayed with me. One day I received a call from the police. They had found the driver. It turned out he was using a fake identity. He had been involved in several similar cases, but always disappeared before anyone could catch him. They thanked me for coming forward and said I had helped prevent further harm. The relief I felt was overwhelming. I realized I had been lucky, luckier than many others. I promised myself to trust my instincts more, never ignore that small voice inside telling me something is wrong. Since then, I have been more cautious about who I get into cars with. I always check the driver's details carefully. I share my ride details with a trusted friend. Safety is not something to take lightly, especially when you depend on strangers for transportation. That night changed me. It taught me the importance of vigilance. I am more aware now, more prepared. I carry a small personal alarm wherever I go. It is a small thing, but it helps me feel safer. Sometimes I still think about the deserted industrial area, the silence, the shadows, the fear. But I also think about how I fought back, how I found a way out, and that gives me strength. I learned that even in the darkest moments, there is a way to survive. You just have to find it. I hope no one else has to face what I did, but if they do, I want them to know they are not alone. They can fight back too. Story 15. I never thought I would be the type to use a dating app. The idea of swiping through faces and trying to find someone compatible seemed exhausting and superficial. But after a long stretch of feeling lonely, I decided to give it a chance. Maybe meeting someone through an app would break the cycle of my isolation and give me a fresh start. I created a profile late one evening, adding a few photos of myself and writing a short bio about my interests and what I was looking for. The next day, I started scrolling through potential matches. Most seemed like normal people looking for connection, but one profile caught my attention immediately. The photos were stunning, and the person seemed funny and genuine in their bio. We matched within minutes, and soon messages started flowing between us. The conversations were easy and lighthearted at first, filled with jokes and questions about favorite movies and music. As days passed, our chats became deeper and more personal. I found myself looking forward to our conversations more than anything else. We decided to meet for coffee after a couple of weeks. I felt nervous but excited. When I saw them waiting at the cafe, my heart skipped a beat.